Today's class is called Master the Foundations. This is going to be a shorter LYT method class. We're going to be using a dowel and a block. If you don't have a dowel, you can use a golf club or a broom or any kind of stick that's long enough to help you find your triple S, which is the back of your skull, shoulder blades, and sacrum. When you're ready, we're going to start on our backs, have the block and the dowel nearby. We're going to lie all the way down and check that triple S. So feel the back of the skull, the shoulder blades, and the sacrum touch down on the ground. Knees are bent, feet on the mat. Bring your hands to your front ribs so we can hold the ribs and the upper part of the spine still. And we'll just arch the low back, tipping the pelvis forward, and then tuck the tailbone under, tipping the pelvis backwards. So while we try to hold everything else still, we're mobilizing the pelvis and the lowest part of the spine, which is the lumbar spine, by just tipping the pelvis forward and back a couple more times, helping to get a little mobility in the lower back. Now find neutral, which is neither tipping forward or tipping back, but just feeling that low back really long and pretty flat against the ground. You can take your block and put it between your knees at any setting that you'd like. Give it just a gentle hug. It doesn't have to be a squeeze. And we'll bring the dowel right across the front of the pelvis or front of the hips so that your dowel is kind of touching those two pelvic points. You can use a little bit of downward pressure to add some resistance, but you can just hold it here so it doesn't fall off. We're going to use the dowel as a little bit of feedback as we push into the feet. Use your glutes to lift your hips up toward the dowel. So we're just lifting those pelvic points straight up into the dowel. Again, add a little resistance if that extra challenge feels nice. Keep the low back long and feel the two pelvic points under the dowel try to draw or cinch in toward each other. You can stay totally still here. You can add some tiny little pulses, lifting and lowering the hips up toward the dowel. But remember that feeling of having our hands on the front ribs like we just did in those pelvic tilts so that we're not moving the ribs around here. The upper back is staying still. We're just moving the hips, waking up the glutes. Pause in that low bridge. Now we're going to grab the dowel, grab it at least shoulder width apart, and we'll do some shoulder flexion. Any amount we start reaching the dowel up toward the ceiling, maybe back toward the ears, but make sure we don't arch the back, lift those ribs, or move the shoulder blades off the ground. And then we bring the dowel back down toward the hips. Lift the dowel up overhead, any amount without the ribs popping or flaring. One more time, shoulder flexion. And then we'll put the dowel aside. Stay in your bridge, gently hugging your block. We'll reach the left palm up. Take those right fingers, pull back into wrist extension. Send that left thumb out to the side or the middle so we get a stretch through the thumb side of the wrist as well. Long in the low back, pushing down into the feet. Switch hands, stretching out the right wrist. Send that right thumb out to the middle. Let's really breathe into the ribs. Hands come back down to your sides. We will exhale and slowly lower the spine one vertebra at a time. You can take the block aside. Hands come behind the head, elbows up or elbows in. Take a huge breath in and feel your breath push into those back ribs. Exhale out through your mouth. We're going to exhale all the way to empty. Try to retain that exhale, so hold the breath if you can. Breathe if you need to breathe. Feel those two pelvic points tighten in toward each other. Inhale to lower. Breathe into the ribs. Exhale through your mouth all the way to empty. Pelvic points draw in. We're just trying to lift off the shoulder blades without yanking on the head or neck. Inhale and lower, adding on. Exhale, lift. Retain that exhale if you can. Pick up the left foot, knee over the hip, hip flexion. Can we do this action without arching the back or popping the ribs up? Slowly lower that left foot down without anything changing. Inhale and lower. Exhale to empty. Retain the breath if you can. Pick up the right foot, knee over the hip. Make sure the ribs didn't pop up, the belly didn't pop up. Slowly lower without anything changing. Inhale and lower. We're going to do one more with an add-on. Exhale, lift up. Not yanking on the head. Draw the pelvic points in. Left foot picks up, knee over the hip. We're going to turn from the center of the chest 1 inch left. Lift that left elbow a touch higher so you stay off the left shoulder blade. Bring it back to center. Slowly lower the foot without popping the belly or the ribs. Inhale and lower. Exhale, lift. Draw the pelvic points in, right knee over the hip. Hold that sacrum down. Turn 1 inch to the right. Lift the right elbow a touch higher so you stay off that right shoulder blade. Bring it back. Foot comes down slowly. Inhale and lower. You can hug the knees in, take a little rock side to side or up and down. And we're going to make our way to quadruped. Coming to the front of the mat, we'll do a couple things here. Go ahead and place that block on your sacrum. So that's the back of the pelvis, that lower back portion. We're going to try to keep it nice and still. So slide the knees in right under the hips, shoulders over the wrist. We want to imagine that we have that dowel taped behind our back so we're not dropping the head, we're not arching. We really feel that neutral spine. We'll hold the head and the pelvis still, soften the chest down so the shoulder blades draw in toward the spine. Push into the hands, spread the shoulder blades apart. Soften the chest, shoulder blades draw in, that's called retraction. Press the ground away, shoulder blades spread apart, that's protraction. So we're trying to feel this movement in the shoulder blades without the spine changing. So we're not rounding and arching the spine like a cat-cow. We're trying to hold everything still and just feel the shoulder blades slide in and out. Now find a neutral scapula that's not retracting, it's not protracting, it's somewhere right in the middle with the shoulder blades resting on the back ribs. We will slide the left toes back, keep them on the ground. Make sure your right hip is nice and stable right over that right knee so it doesn't move out to the side. And we'll float the left toes up, bend the knee, hold your triple S, hold the shoulder blades the same. Pull forward into hip flexion. So thigh starts coming toward the belly any amount. Keep the knee bent, hip extension. Pull forward, hip flexion. Extend it back, hip extension. This might be so small in either direction or both directions because we're trying not to get the back muscles to be involved. So try not to tip the pelvis around, hold it nice and still. As we focus on this movement in the left hip, stabilizing everywhere else from that right hip to the shoulders. And then lower that left knee down. Recheck your triple S, your neutral scapula. Right toes back. Float the right toes without that left hip moving over to the left. So it stays right over the left knee. We're going to keep the right knee bent. Pull it forward, thigh to belly, hip flexion without rounding the back. Extend it back behind you without arching the back. Pull forward, hip flexion. Extend it back, hip extension. And the whole time we're feeling those two pelvic points tighten in toward each other. Maybe the pubic bone is zippering up toward the belly a little bit. Head and neck stay still. Pressing into both hands. Lower it down to quadruped. Let's move the block aside. And we'll come into down dog. From that really shortened quadruped, tuck your toes like you're pressing the ground away. Really active through the hands. Press into the fingers and the knuckles as we pike the pelvis up. So we're trying to keep this closeness of belly to thighs by bending the knees and keeping the heels lifted. You can release the head, but don't force it to go between the hands. Have the head a little bit forward of the hands, lifting those front ribs up so we're not arching the back or flaring the ribs. You can pedal the feet out if that feels nice. But we just don't want to force the heels down. We don't want to force the legs to stay straight. We've got a lot of tight fascia all the way from the posterior chain, which is the back body, so from the legs all the way up the back, that are really tight. So by bending the knees and lifting the heels in down dog, we can find this feeling of length and lift by keeping the spine neutral and the pelvis neutral. We're going to have a huge bend in the knees. Walk your hands back toward the feet and lower the heels down as soon as you can into triple flexion. We're trying to keep belly toward the thighs, long spine, and then we'll use the legs and the glutes to rise up. Get your dowel or your golf club, whatever you have, and we're going to find that triple S. So again, we're trying to find back of the skull, shoulder blades, and sacrum touching the dowel, or one of them, or two of them, whatever you can. And we're just gonna march it forward, pick up that left foot. Step it down. The leg doesn't have to go high. This action of bringing belly toward the thigh or thigh to belly is the same thing we just did in quadruped. Hip flexion. Holding that triple S. Good. Once you get to the front, we're going to put the dowel down and we will start our sequence. Soften the knees as if you still have that dowel behind your back. We're going to reach the arms forward and up. Lift the armpits way up toward the ears and then hinge forward. Right foot steps back. We'll lower the knee, but not the toes. Grabbing that dowel again to find our triple S. So maybe it touches all three, skull, scapula, sacrum. Maybe it just touches one or two. And let's really firm this right glute so we get a nice active stretch at the front of the right hip. Breathe into the side and back ribs. We'll add a hinge. Inhale, hinge forward. So we're trying to bring belly toward the thighs. That's again hip flexion without losing the dowel, and then push into that left foot to get you back up. Hinging forward nice and slow. Maybe we're only moving an inch or so. So we're thinking butt back, chest forward, spine is long, and the dowel is just here to give us some feedback. What are our habits? Do we tend to move with the head first? If we're moving, if we're losing the connection of the head and the dowel, that probably means we're used to just dropping the head to get us lower. Now put the dowel aside. We're going to pause in quadruped. That block is going to come to your sacrum again. And we'll pause, feeling that triple S, that neutral scapula. Left toes back. Make sure the right hip stays stable as we float the left toes. Bend the knee. This time we're going to externally and internally rotate that left hip. So we're trying to balance the block without it tipping around. Feel your two pelvic points draw in as that left thigh rolls away from the body, external rotation, and in toward the body, internal rotation. Working that outer right hip to stabilize, pressing evenly into both hands. Lower that left knee down, move the block aside, or you could try to keep it there. From quadruped, we will do that shoulder blade protraction and retraction, keeping the ears in line with the shoulders, holding the pelvis still as we mobilize the shoulder blades. Now let's find neutral, somewhere in between retracting and protracting. Hold your triple F, step the left foot back for plank, and then the right foot. We'll pause here for just a moment, seeing if we can hold that triple S alignment as we come to plank, working the whole core. Now we'll walk the feet in, soften the knees, into that really shortened down dog, heels lifted, pressing into the fingers, lifting those front ribs up toward the body. Walk the hands back toward the feet again, happy squat. Big bend in the knees, ankles are flexed, knees are flexed, and hips are flexed. We'll rise up with the dowel, and again, use the dowel to connect to your triple S, skull, shoulder blades, and sacrum, and we'll march forward. It does not matter how high the thigh lifts toward the belly. The goal is to keep that spine neutral. So the dowel gives us great feedback onto our movement habits. We're going to pause with that left foot down, right foot up. And then we'll step the right foot back, turn to the side of the mat, externally rotate the hips, so toes turn out, coming from the hips. And we're just going to pulse here in our squat. Now, a lot of us like to tip the pelvis forward here, really overarching the low back. So notice, what is the hardest part to touch the dowel here? Is it the lower back? Is it the shoulder blades? Is it the head? We'll turn to the back of the mat. Feet as wide as you'd like, knees as bent as you'd like, holding triple S. Inhale forward, standing hip hinge. Exhale, press the ground away. Use the glutes and the legs to get you back up. Inhale forward, hip hinge. Keeping the dowel connected. Exhale, rise up. Try a couple more. You can go slower. You can go a touch faster. But just use the dowel as a little bit of feedback to your movement habits. Are we losing the head connecting to the dowel? Are we losing the shoulder blades? Is it hard to keep the sacrum touching the dowel? And then we'll put it aside, but we're going to use it. And we're going to start the second side facing the back of the mat. So same start, reach the arms up. Armpits lift. We hinge forward. Left foot steps back now. Lower the knee, but not the toes. Rise up, and again, that dowel is going to come to check your triple S. Take a few breaths here, really firm in this left glute. So we're stretching the front of that left hip. Breathe into the sides of the rib cage. Breathe into the back of the rib cage like you could breathe right into that dowel behind you. Let's add our hinges. We just did this standing. Inhale, hinge forward, belly toward the thighs. Exhale, push the ground away. Try to stay connected to the dowel. Inhale forward. Exhale, lift back up. Strong legs, strong glutes. Inhale forward. Exhale, lift. Notice if one side feels different than the other. Maybe one leg forward, it's easier to hold the dowel. Maybe one side's a little trickier. Put the dowel aside. We're going to grab our block, quadruped. Place the block on your sacrum. Back of the pelvis, we'll try to balance it here. Snug those knees in nice and tight. Shoulders over your wrist. Right toes back. Make sure that left hip doesn't move as you float the right toes. Bend the knee from the top of the thigh bone. We roll the thigh out, external rotation, and in toward the body, internal rotation. As small as it needs to be to not lose that block on your sacrum. Feel your two pelvic points cinched in like you're tightening some sweatpants. And we're really trying to work that left hip to stabilize and hold that left leg still. Notice if your head is dropping down or the ribs are drooping down. We're really relying on the whole core to help us stabilize. Lower the right knee back in for quadruped. Option to hold the block here as we retract and protract the shoulder blades. Remember, we're trying not to move the spine here. We're just trying to slide the shoulder blades in toward the spine and away from the spine. Find neutral, that happy medium. Step the right foot back for plank. And then the left foot. Can we hold that feeling of imaginary broom behind our back? We'll come into down dog. So if you have the block, you can slide the knees back in, move the block aside, and then really pike the pelvis up, down dog. Make sure you're not forcing the head between the arms. Lift those thigh bones up, up, up. Press into the fingers and the knuckles. Walk the hands back toward the feet. Big bend in the knees, belly toward the thighs. Land the heels as soon as you can into that triple flexion. Rise up and we will grab the dowel. Again, place it on your triple S. March forward. It can be the tiniest lift of the thigh. Hip flexion as we bring thigh to belly. Try to hold that connection of the dowel. We're going to end with our right foot down, left foot up. Turn to the side of the mat, step the left foot back. Open to the side, we externally rotate. Keep the dowel here as we pulse. These could be tiny, tiny pulses. Notice if you tend to overarch the low back here, that means it's going to be hard to feel the dowel near the sacrum. Maybe it's hard to keep the shoulder blades or the head touching the dowel here. So whatever it is, it's not about being perfect. The dowel is just giving us information onto our movement habits. And what we tend to do when we're moving, let's turn to the front, standing hip hinges. Inhale, forward, knees as bent as you need for the hamstrings. Exhale, really dig the feet into the ground. Use those legs and glutes to get you up. Inhale, forward. Exhale, lift. And as you keep doing a few more hip hinges here, just check in with that dowel. Is it maybe getting a little bit easier to hold that triple S? Is it still just as tricky? What are we learning about the ways we tend to move? All right, we're gonna put the dowel aside and we're gonna do that sequence one more time in our stream. So we're gonna add a little bit more challenge and a couple more movements onto it. So whenever you're ready, we'll get started. Let's reach the arms up. Armpits lift, hinge forward. You have the option to stick with low lunge, like we did the first time. Right foot steps back, land the knee, not the toes, or take this into a high lunge. Bring it a little bit higher up for a different movement challenge here. And we'll add those same hinges. So again, you could be doing this with the right knee down, hinging forward, or try it in a high lunge. Challenge that triple S. Trying to do our best to keep that dowel connected to the skull, the shoulder blades, and the sacrum. Now you can come back to quadruped for that hip rotation. I can show it both ways. If you're in quadruped, we're going to do left toes back, block on the sacrum, float the toes, bend the knee. Same hip rotation here, moving really mindfully. Or down dog. Float the left leg no higher than hip height. Bend the knee, and again, externally and internally rotate the hip so the thigh bone is rolling out, rolling in, but the low back does not change. If you're in down dog, don't force the head between the arms. Lift those front ribs up. We're all going to end up stepping that left foot forward. So from either position, quadruped or down dog, we step left foot forward, rise up. So lift off that right knee. If you were in quadruped, grab your dowel. Let's turn to the side. Add some side lunges. So this time feet are parallel. We use the dowel to hold triple S. And we'll just alternate some side lunges, any pace. So this is also a hip hinge, just like that standing hip hinge, just like that hip hinge we've been practicing in our lunge. But now we're just moving side to side. We're still thinking hips back, chest forward. Notice if you're really dropping the head down and losing the connection there. Let's turn to the back of the mat for our standing hip hinges. We'll add on a little bit here. Hip hinge, inhale forward. Exhale up, and then pick up the right foot, hip flexion. Step it down. Inhale, hinge forward. Exhale up, pick up the left foot. So we'll just alternate. We're doing our standing hip hinge and then adding standing hip flexion. Remember, it doesn't have to be high, the amount we lift the thigh. This is all about kind of repatterning our movement patterns, holding the spine still as we move the hip. We're going to end with the right foot down, left foot up. And again, turn to the side of the mat. Externally rotate the hips, toes turn out a little bit for our squat. Use the dowel for a moment to check in with that triple S. And now we're going to bring the dowel in front of us just like we did in bridge pose. Lift up, shoulder flexion without popping the ribs or arching the back, and then bring it down. Shoulder flexion. Bring it down. So everybody's will look different. We're only lifting our arms the amount we can without the ribs moving forward or anything about the spine changing. So this is all about mobility of the shoulder. One more. Put the dowel down. We're going to turn back to the front of the mat. Modified side plank. So right hand can come to the ground or to a block. Right knee slides in under the hip. If you want to kickstand that right foot out to the side, if that helps you set up here, you can. Left foot back. So we've got right shoulder over the wrist, zipper the pubic bone up. You can bring hand to the sacrum as if it were the dowel. You could have hands on the front ribs, making sure they're not flaring or popping forward. And if you're feeling really steady here, go ahead and float that left leg. I'll give you one more option, a tiny little pulse, lifting and lowering into hip abduction. But the goal is to keep right shoulder and the right hip so still. Quadruped. Let's protract and retract a couple times. Moving just the shoulder blades without the head changing, without the spine changing. Find your neutral position. Step the left foot back for plank, and then the right foot. Hold here, maintaining triple S like that dowel is taped behind you. Let's walk the feet in for down dog, shortening the stance, lifting the ribs. Walk your hands back toward the feet, belly toward the thighs, happy squat. Rise up, grab that dowel. It's going to come to your triple S. Instead of marching this time, we're going to do hip abduction. So we pick up the left foot, left leg moves slightly to the left, and then we step it down. Pick up the right foot, it moves slightly to the right, but nothing else changes. So those pelvic points are drawing in. One hip isn't getting higher than the other. And when you come to the front, we'll put the dowel down, but we are going to use it in just a second for our lunge. Second side, we reach the arms up, armpits lift, hinge forward. Now we do left foot back, low lunge or high lunge, whatever you'd prefer. If you're in high lunge, keep that left knee soft. Align that neutral spine and we'll add our hinges. Inhaling forward. Exhaling up. So we're really using the glutes to control this descent and to help us lift back up. Check in with which part is having the hardest time staying connected to the dowel. Is it the lower back? Is it the shoulder blades? Is it the back of the head? We're going to transition hands down. You can do quadruped or three-legged dog. If you're in three-legged dog, right knee bends, no higher than hip height. We add that external and internal rotation without the low back turning and without the rib cage turning. So the only thing moving is the thigh bone. Same thing if you're in quadruped. You can always use the block still on the sacrum. Ribs don't turn, shoulders don't turn. Low back doesn't turn. We're really just training our brain and our body to only move the hip here. We'll all end up stepping right foot forward. Grab your dowel. We'll lift off that left knee. Turn to the left, facing the side of the mat. Dowel comes to that triple S as we side lunge. Any pace you'd like to do this. We're thinking hips or butt back, long spine. Turn to the back of the mat for those standing hip hinges where we add that add-on of hip flexion. Inhale, hinge forward, knees as bent as you need. Exhale up, pick up the left foot. Step it down, hold that triple S. Inhale, hinge forward. Exhale, dig the heels into the ground to get you up, pick up the right foot. So we'll just alternate a couple times, holding that triple S. We'll stay with the left leg down, right leg up. Turn to the side of the mat, so we step that right foot back, turn back to the side of the mat, externally rotate, use the dowel to really imprint that feeling of your triple S. This time we're gonna do dowel in front, bring it up any height without the ribs popping or flaring. Lift the dowel and your armpits up, 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 up toward the ears, toward the ceiling. And we're gonna side bend instead of working on shoulder flexion on this side. If you want a little more action for the shoulders, you're just gonna try to rip or pull that dowel apart or pull it in two, and you're gonna feel much more engagement around the shoulders as we side bend. Keep pressing into the feet, not letting that low back overarch. Turn to the front of the mat. Modified side plank. Left hand can come straight to the ground or to your block. Left knee slides in under the hip. Right foot back. Zipper the pubic bone to the belly. Make sure your ribs aren't popping forward, but they're staying stacked over the pelvis. Maybe hand is here or on the sacrum. Maybe we float that right leg. Maybe you want to add a tiny little lift and lower to challenge the strength and stability of that left shoulder and left hip. Just an option. Make your way to quadruped, hands and knees. Imaginary dowel behind your back. We retract and protract a couple times, holding everything else still. Find your neutral, not protracting or retracting. Step right foot back for plank, and then the left. Tighten those two pelvic points in. Lift the hips, walk the feet in, soften the knees, down dog. Breathe into the ribs, press into the fingertips. Hands walk back, land the heels as soon as you can. Happy squat, belly to the thighs. Let's rise up with our dowel. Last time here, feel for that triple S. We add hip abduction as we walk forward. So hip abduction is when the leg moves away from the midline of the body, so it just moves out to the side, but the pelvis doesn't change, so it's just the thigh bone moving away from the body. Whenever you get to the front, let's cool down. We'll put the dowel aside, back to quadruped. You can take a couple rounds of cat-cow or even belly roll if that feels nice. Just moving your spine out of that neutral position we've been in for so much of the class today. And we'll take an adductor stretch. So from your hands and knees position, we'll step the left foot out to the left, plant that whole left foot down, and let's just rock forward and back a couple times. Any amount that feels good for that left inner thigh. Let's think about the pelvis for a moment. So right around that tailbone, we don't want to be overly lifting the tailbone or tucking the tailbone while we're stretching here. We just want to keep it fairly neutral like we've been practicing throughout the class. And then bring that left knee in, right foot steps out to the right. Plant that whole right foot down. Let's add those adductor rocks, getting a nice stretch through that right inner thigh, all the way up into the groin. Slow your breath down. Couple options. You can come onto your back. You can end in a seated position. You want to take a little bit longer to stretch or cool or warm down. Maybe take a figure four if you've got time. If not, we'll either find a seated position or lie down however you'd like. We'll close the eyes. Relaxing your forehead. Relaxing your jaw. Notice where you're feeling your breath move in your body. Take a moment to thank yourself for your practice today, for showing up even when it's hard. I invite you to send one grateful thought out into the universe.